Prime Minister Gordon Brown, who will say a few words. Then we'll take 2 questions from the traveling press and 2 questions from the UN correspondents. Okay, please.
Mr. Prime Minister, ladies and gentlemen of the press, I had a very productive, good meeting with the Prime Minister Gordon Brown on a number of issues, including the forthcoming G20 summit meeting. I highly commend the leadership that Prime Minister Gordon Brown has been demonstrating as a chair of this G20 summit meeting to address a financial crisis, and hope that the summit meeting will have a great successful result under your dynamic leadership. I also appreciate the support the UK government has extended to the objectives of the United Nations in trying to bring to the G20 forum. I relayed my concern to Prime Minister Gordon Brown that the economic crisis continues to grow in severity and threatens to evolve into a crisis of political instability and social unrest in many parts of the world. We agreed that we must not allow this crisis to erode the progress we have already made toward the Millennium Development Goals. Social recovery will take much longer than economic recovery. A child taken out of school today will bear the consequences for the rest of his or her life. I outlined to the Prime Minister the 4 areas where I believe G20 countries need to show strong leadership. First, G20 countries should commit to sustaining an international stimulus package on top of their national stimulus packages. This international stimulus needs to be of a very substantial size, commensurate with the challenge. It needs to comprise aid for the poorest and most vulnerable countries, long-term public lending from the multilateral development banks, and liquidity support not only to least developed countries, but also middle-income developing countries. This comprehensive package will be possible if existing commitments are met, including those made in Gleneagles to increase aid, and new resources are also mobilized. Second, we agreed on the need to stand firm against the protectionism and reinvigorate the Doha trade round so that it delivers real benefits for developing countries. Third, we agreed that G20 leaders must support a greening of the global economy, including in poorer countries, and that they should commit themselves to sealing a deal at climate talks in Copenhagen, December this year. Finally, we discussed how to reform global rules and institutions so that they reflect today's economic and political landscape. I'm hopeful that the London Summit meeting can send a signal of solidarity and hope to all peoples and countries of the world. We also discussed the humanitarian situation in Sudan and also situations in Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, and Myanmar, and other peace-building efforts. I expect to continue my engagement on these issues in the next 2 weeks when I travel to Moscow, Doha, The Hague, London, Paris, and Istanbul. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Can I first of all thank the Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon for his leadership. I want to thank him for what he has sought to achieve in Gaza. I want to thank him for the work that he is doing with us in Afghanistan and the development program that the United Nations is involved in. I want to say that the humanitarian agencies that are working in Sudan should be allowed to stay there and continue their work, and that the United Nations report that has been released with the Sudanese government yesterday shows the damage that is being done to the people of the region as a result of the failure of humanitarian agencies to be able to exist and work in that country. We have talked about the G20, and we've talked about the Secretary-General's presence at the meeting to do, as he says, to represent the voices of the poorest countries in the world. 100 million people have been pushed into poverty. 500,000 more children will die as a result of the failure of our system to be able to provide enough food and help and medical aid for them. Therefore, it is urgent at the G20 summit that we take action to help the problems of the poorest. And I look forward to Ban Ki-moon's contribution to the G20 meeting. I think we are recognizing that the Washington consensus on economic policy is over, that the old world has gone, that we have got to build a new consensus on economic development for the future. And the message to every country, I think, is that doing nothing is no longer an option. And we will have to take action in London to make sure that the banking system is reformed, to ensure ourselves that our financial institutions can come to the aid of the poorest countries, and to make sure that we do what is necessary to ensure that there is strong growth and recovery, and particularly jobs in the world economy as a result of the actions that we take. I have said to Ban Ki-moon that our duty is to help every country of the world and to recognize the interdependence of the world economy, that banks are entangled with each other, and there is no solution that is not a global solution that requires global standards for the banking system around the world. And it is with the determination of the United Nations to see action that I now go to Brazil and to Chile and to meet leaders in Latin America as we complete the process of consultation that I hope will lead to a successful outcome at the G20. As I repeat, doing nothing is not an option. We in the world community have to show the world that when there is difficulty, we act. When there is suffering, we are prepared to take the action that is necessary, and when there is need, we are prepared to meet it.
Well, let's first go to Tom Brightby, ITN, Travelling Press.
Prime Minister, do you agree with the Governor of the Bank of England that we now need to be very cautious and that we in Britain can't afford to spend any more money on another fiscal stimulus or anything else?
What the Governor of the Bank of England said yesterday is that targeted action may indeed be necessary in the future. And I think what everybody agrees is it's the combination of the fiscal measures we're taking, the cuts in interest rates that have happened, the quantitative easing that is now being done by the Bank of England, and the international action we'll take over the next few weeks that will make the difference. And so I say to you, we will do whatever it takes to make sure that we have a strong recovery.
Mr. Prime Minister, we understand now that King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia is heading to the G20. What importance do you attach to the participation of Arab countries, although they are rich countries, but their economies are small by comparison?
I talked to King Abdullah a few days ago. I said that I hoped he would be able to come to the G20 summit. He is very welcome at the summit, and we look forward to talking to him about the contribution that we can all make to the financial stability of the world, to greater economic growth in the world, and to the plight of some of the poorest countries in the world. On all these issues, I know that King Abdullah will want to play his full part in our discussions.
Reuters.
Yeah, Prime Minister, the Secretary General is asking the G20 to approve $1 trillion stimulus plan for developing countries. Do you think that kind of amount of resources is feasible? And secondly, how can you pressure Sudan to take back the humanitarian aid workers?
Let me deal with the second point first. It is very important that we send a message to the President of Sudan that humanitarian agencies are doing vital work. His government now recognises that hundreds of thousands of people are going to be displaced. Many are to be without food. Many are to be homeless as a result of the loss of the humanitarian agencies' work in Sudan. And so even at this stage, I want the whole world to ask him to remove the ban on humanitarian agencies, to recognise that they are absolutely essential to the protection of people in Sudan. And at the same time, of course, we want the rebels and the government to work together to get a political solution to this crisis. On the issue of the summit, we will want to give support to the poorest countries. We will want also to be in a position where the banking system has failed in countries which cannot themselves pay for or support the reconstruction of that banking system, that through the international institutions we are going to be able to help them. And we will want also through the World Bank and its proposals for a vulnerability fund to do more to help those who are in poverty on top of what is done by the Millennium Development Goals. So the combination of what we do will be substantial, but of course I've got to talk to the different countries about what contributions they are prepared to make, and I cannot, and I don't think it's possible for me to put a figure on that at the moment.
We go to Edie Lederer, AP.
Mr. Secretary General, you have been quoted as saying you will ask the G20 for $1 trillion to help the developing world deal with the financial crisis. That works out to $50 billion per country. Can you confirm this? And Prime Minister Brown, is that a realistic target given the current state of the finances of the G20 countries?
First of all, I have written a letter to all G20 leaders about my ideas and thinkings, how international community in coordinations can address this economic crisis. My position is that while I would welcome the G20 leaders to formulate their national stimulus packages, they should never lose the sight of challenges and pride of developing countries, particularly most vulnerable poor countries. This position of the United Nations is the one which I have listened from all 192 countries during my informal General Assembly meeting, that I really wanted to convey and reflect on the basis of the wishes of the member states. I'm sure that G20 leaders will reflect and consider positively on addressing these issues. On the exact amount of aid, of course, I had some ideas, but at this time, I'm not in a position to say anything in exact amount terms, but that depends upon how leaders can discuss on these issues. As the Prime Minister has just said, this needs to be discussed and debated among the leaders. But my position is that the G20 leaders, particularly G8, they have to implement the Gleneagles commitment. And if we utilize all existing mechanisms, existing commitment, and with the more new resources mobilized, then I think this can be achievable and doable one. But that I'm going to discuss with the leaders there.
I think the discussion is about what we can do, first of all, to help those countries that have problems with their financial systems, make sure that their banking systems can properly serve the people. We've got to also make sure that the trading system around the world, which is not functioning properly, where trade is declining, that we can help those countries who want to trade but don't have the facilities, the export credits and the trade credits to do so. But we must also help with what has been called a vulnerability fund, help those people and those countries that are in particular difficulty as a result of what has happened. Now, nobody is in a position to give a figure about what that means, but what I can say is in each of these areas we're making progress in our discussion with other countries.